A deaf woman struggled to order soup until a duke translated a sign language that made her smile. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. Elin Fraser pushed open the tavern door with a careful hand, though she barely felt the wood beneath her fingers. The warmth inside washed over her at once, carrying the murmur of voices she could not hear, yet felt as a faint vibration in the air. People talked, laughed, shifted in their seats and scraped chairs across the floor. The usual chaos. She knew it well. She braced herself against it. She stepped inside, clutching the edge of her shawl. The server passed by her without a glance, carrying a tray of mugs. She tried to catch his attention, but he moved too quickly. She waited, ignored again by two men who brushed past toward an empty table. She swallowed and approached the counter, hoping the light from the hearth would make her gestures clearer. The server finally turned. He was middle-aged, tired, and more interested in the coins in another customer's hand. He spoke to Elin, but the words dissolved into nothing. She watched his lips trying to catch meaning, but his mouth moved too fast, his voice too soft. She pointed toward the hearth where a pot of soup simmered. She brought her fingers to her lips, then gestured toward a bowl. The server frowned. He said something again, louder this time. The vibration reached her chest, but the meaning did not. She pointed again, slower, shaping the gesture with exaggerated clarity. "Soup, please." He sighed. A few patrons turned to watch. One of them chuckled, elbowing the man beside him. Elin caught the motion, not the sound. Her heart tightened, but she tried again. Her hands moved, steady but firm. The server's face reddened, not in anger but in embarrassment. He waved his hand as if shooing away a persistent insect. She stepped forward, unwilling to retreat after working up so much courage. She pointed to the pot once more, shaking her head to show she did not understand his words. The server raised his voice and the room paused. People looked up, curious. She hated this part, the moment when her silence became a spectacle. She tried to sign her request in the simple gestures her mother had taught her long ago, hoping someone, anyone, might recognize them. The server glanced at her moving hands, bewildered, confused, impatient. A man near the fire snorted. Another whispered something that made two women hide their smiles. Elin felt heat rise in her cheeks. She clutched her shawl harder, wishing she could slip beneath it and vanish. She backed away, shaking her head in apology. She had not meant to cause trouble. The server muttered something, still irritated, and gestured toward the door as though she should leave if she could not make up her mind. Her pulse beat faster. She breathed slowly, telling herself to remain calm. She looked down at her hands. They trembled slightly. She had expected challenges, but not such open dismissal. She debated leaving the tavern altogether and walking back into the cold mist, where at least no one expected her to speak. But she was hungry and tired, and lonely in that way that settled deep in the bones. She tried one last time. She touched her stomach, pointed to the pot, and pressed her palms together in a quiet plea. The server shook his head and turned away. Elin stood frozen, unable to move, humiliated before people whose faces she would forget by morning. She considered slipping out while they returned to their meals. A few eyes still lingered on her. She felt every one of them like a cold draft along her spine. Then the tavern door opened with a sudden gust of winter air. Heads turned, coats rustled, chairs shifted. A tall man stepped inside, bringing the outside chill with him. His presence changed the rhythm of the room instantly, not by power displayed, but by something quieter, an authority people felt rather than saw. His coat was long, woolen, dark from snowmelt. His hair was wind-tossed. His gaze was sharp but weary, as if burdened by thoughts heavier than the journey. He surveyed the tavern briefly before his attention settled on Elin. His brow furrowed. Something about her stillness, about the tension in her shoulders, caught him. She lowered her gaze, hoping to disappear from his notice, but he approached slowly, his steps deliberate. She prepared for yet another stranger asking why she would not answer when spoken to. He reached the counter beside her. The server straightened at once, recognizing someone of rank. The man asked something. Elin saw his lips move, but the server answered quickly, nervously. The newcomer listened only half-heartedly. His attention drifted back to her. He studied her trembling hands. He looked at the pot of soup, the confused server, the lingering stares from the patrons. Understanding dawned across his face in a way she had seen only once before, years ago, from a traveler who had known a handful of signs. The man turned toward her fully. Elin stiffened. He said something she could not catch. But then his hands lifted. They moved with deliberate care. "Are you asking for soup?" Her breath caught. The room fell away. She stared, unable to believe what she saw. His gestures were not perfect, but close enough, familiar enough. Words she had not seen in years, words shaped in silence. She answered quickly, her signs hesitant at first, then steady. "Yes." "The soup. I tried." "They do not understand me." He nodded with a compassion so gentle it startled her. He turned to the server, speaking in firm, clear words. The man stuttered, apologized, and rushed to fill a bowl. The newcomer took it himself and placed it on the nearest table. He signed again. "Please, sit. You have waited long enough." Elin hesitated. Her hands fluttered with uncertainty. She did not want pity. She had endured enough of that. But he did not look at her with pity. He looked at her as if she were a person with a voice he understood. She obeyed. He pulled out a chair for her. She sat, gripping the edge of the table. She wanted to thank him, but feared her signs would betray how shaken she truly was. He did not sit yet. He studied her, not with curiosity, but with something quieter, a kind of recognition. She signed slowly. "You know the signs. How?" His expression changed. A shadow crossed his eyes, faint but unmistakable. He took a seat across from her and answered with his hands. "Someone dear to me used them." Her gaze softened with understanding. She nodded once, acknowledging the weight in his expression. She wanted to ask more, but she respected silence when it formed between two people who had suffered its edges. He gestured for her to eat. She lifted the spoon, grateful beyond words. When she brought it to her lips, warmth spread through her chest, not just from the soup but from the simple dignity he had restored to her. He watched her without staring, without scrutiny, without discomfort. She felt the unfamiliar safety of being seen. When she finished, she signed another question. "Why did you help me?" This time he looked down briefly, as if searching for the right words. When he lifted his hands, they moved with the measured grace of someone speaking from truth rather than ease, because no one should struggle alone for something so simple. Her throat tightened. She lowered her gaze, overwhelmed by the sincerity she saw. He leaned forward slightly, waiting for her to respond, but she found no gesture that could match the feeling rising in her chest. He seemed about to speak again when the server approached nervously and addressed him with a stiff bow. The newcomer waved him off with quiet courtesy, then turned back to her. She studied him carefully. He did not behave like an ordinary man. He carried himself with a posture people noticed. When other patrons murmured his way, they did so with caution. She glanced at two men whispering near the hearth. One mouthed a word she recognized from years of reading expressions. "Duke." Her breath caught. She looked sharply at him. He noticed the change in her gaze and realized she understood. "So you have heard of me?" He signed with a small wry curve of the lips. She nodded, unsure how to behave now. He sensed her unease and shook his head gently. "Do not let the title trouble you." She looked away. Titles always brought distance, always brought walls, and she had just begun to feel the first warmth of connection. He read her discomfort as clearly as her signs. "I am Alistair MacDougall, and I wish only to speak with you, if you will allow it." She frowned slightly. "Why?" His answer came slower this time, as if the words were drawn from a place he rarely touched. "Because you remind me of someone who mattered deeply to me." She understood immediately, because grief often recognized its own reflection. Before she could form her next sign, a gasp rose from a table behind them. A woman nudged her companion, whispering the Duke's name with astonished urgency. The room stirred, and the atmosphere shifted again. Elin began to withdraw, shrinking into her shawl. Alistair saw it at once. He leaned closer and signed, "May I sit with you a little longer?" She stared at him, unsure how to answer. Her fingers lifted, trembling slightly, and just as she began to form her reply, a woman across the tavern rose abruptly, eyes wide with recognition, and whispered his full title with enough force for every pair of eyes to turn toward them. The stranger lifts his hands and begins to sign. The tavern grew strangely still as the whispered title traveled through the room. Heads turned, chairs scraped. People shifted in uncomfortable curiosity, unsure whether to bow, stare, or pretend they had not heard. Elin felt the change like a sudden draft, though she heard none of the noise that followed. She saw only faces tightening with interest, backs straightening, hands pausing mid-motion. Alistair's expression did not change. He kept his gaze on her hands, as though the world around them did not exist. He signed again, slower this time, giving her space to breathe. "May I sit with you?" Elin hesitated. Her fingers touched the edge of the bowl. She sensed the weight of the room pressing in from every side. People watched their every movement. Expectations shifted in the air, subtle but undeniable. A duke did not sit with a girl like her, yet he waited with a patience so calm it unsettled her. She nodded. He took the seat across from her, maintaining a respectful distance. The murmurs grew louder, though Elin saw only the movement of mouths and the faint tremor of vibrations across the table. She avoided looking at anyone else, focusing instead on the steady rhythm of Alistair's breathing. He signed, "Do not let them trouble you." She answered, "They already do." He offered a faint, reassuring smile. It did not chase the fear away, but it softened it. A serving maid approached reluctantly, her eyes bouncing between them as though unsure whether she was allowed to interrupt. She curtsied awkwardly to Alistair. He spoke to her briefly, his tone even. The girl nodded and hurried off. Elin watched the exchange, feeling small beneath the unfamiliar weight of his title. She signed, "You should not sit with me. People will talk." He leaned forward slightly. "Let them talk. They always do." She frowned, uncertain whether he meant this for her or for himself. Before she could respond, a man near the hearth muttered something. She saw another patron lean closer to listen. Their gazes flicked her way with thinly masked curiosity. She shifted in her seat, fingers curling against her skirt. Alistair noticed at once. His hands moved with quiet firmness. "You are not an inconvenience. Do you understand?" She nodded, though her heart did not fully believe it. The serving maid returned with a fresh pot of tea and 2 cups. She set them down with trembling hands, bowing again. When she left, Alistair poured the tea carefully, the small gesture carrying an unexpected gentleness. Elin watched him, puzzled. Whoever he was, whatever burdens he carried, he was not like the nobleman she had heard of. She signed, "You do not act like a duke." He raised a brow. "How does a duke act?" She considered. Cold, important, distant. She did not sign those words aloud, but he seemed to read them anyway. He shook his head. "I have never cared for such performances." She studied his face, wondering what stories hid behind the quiet lines at the corners of his eyes. He sipped his tea, then asked, "May I know your name?" She told him, her fingers shaping the familiar gesture. "Elin Fraser." He repeated it, moving his hands lightly, almost reverently. "Elin." A strong name. She looked down, unsure how to respond to that. A few moments passed in delicate silence, the kind that felt almost warm, until the tavern door swung open sharply. A cold gust swept through. Another wave of murmurs followed. Elin looked up to see a young man, breathless from running, scanning the room with urgent eyes. When he spotted Alistair, he hurried forward and bowed deeply. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. You are needed at once." Alistair straightened, the calm in his posture tightening into something more rigid. He spoke aloud, and though Elin could not hear his words, she saw the shift in his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. The messenger explained further, using his hands in brisk motions that suggested distress. Elin caught fragments of the expression in his eyes, worry, apology, pressure. Alistair nodded once. His gaze flickered toward her, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. Regret, frustration, the wonder of a connection interrupted too soon. He rose from the table. Elin stood as well, unsure what etiquette required of her. He shook his head softly, signing, "Please do not rise for me." But she remained standing. Her hands moved hesitantly. "You must go." He paused, his eyes softened. "It seems I must." She forced a small nod. "Thank you for helping me." He answered with a gesture that felt almost like a promise. "I am glad I was here." He reached for his coat, but before turning to leave, he signed one last sentence. "May I see you again?" Her breath caught. She had no plan for tomorrow. No certainty in her life, no assurance that such a meeting could ever happen again. Yet she felt a warmth spread through her chest, quiet but persistent. She signed a single word, yes. He gave a short, sincere bow. Nothing theatrical, only respectful. Then he followed the messenger out the door. The tavern seemed colder the moment he stepped into the mist. The room fell into uneasy silence again. Some patrons whispered. Others exchanged knowing glances. A few looked at Ailyn with new, sharp interest, as though her worth had changed simply because a duke had spoken to her. She sank back into her chair, no longer hungry. Her heart beat faster than before. She tried to steady her breath, but the memory of his hands forming her name lingered in the air. She pressed her palms together in an effort to calm herself. She had no idea whether he would truly return. Nobles lived in a world far from hers. Titles and duties shaped their every move. She had seen too much of life to believe kindness lasted. Yet a part of her wished she had said more. She decided to leave before more people stared. Pulling her shawl tight, she stepped outside into the mist-laden street. The cold bit at her fingers. She walked past the dim glow of shop windows and the faint outlines of carriages moving along the road. She could not hear the bells or the horses' hooves, but she felt their tremor along the ground. In the quiet of the evening, her thoughts grew heavier. She wondered why Alistair MacDougall had looked at her with such understanding, why he had seemed so certain she deserved respect when most people treated her as a burden. She reached the narrow building where she rented her small room above a seamstress's shop. She climbed the stairs, pushing open the door to the dimly lit hallway. The quiet pressed against her, familiar but unwelcome after such an unexpected encounter. She stepped into her room and shut the door behind her. The loneliness rushed back at once, colder than the winter air outside. She lit a small candle and sat at the edge of her bed, replaying every gesture Alistair had made, the way his hands shaped meaning, the way his eyes softened when she answered. She did not know what it meant, and she had lived long enough not to expect anything to come of it. She settled beneath her blanket, too restless to sleep. She stared at the ceiling, wondering whether she had imagined the hope in his expression. Outside, the footsteps of passers-by faded as the night deepened. The candle's flame flickered on the wall, swaying with each draught. Ailyn closed her eyes to steady her thoughts. She did not see the shadow outside her window. A figure stood on the street below, half hidden beneath a hood and cloak. He watched the faint light from her room, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. His posture was tense, caught between hesitation and certainty. After several minutes, he whispered something she could not hear. His voice broke on the words, heavy with disbelief and relief. "So, she is still alive." By morning, rumors had already begun to spread through the narrow streets of Inverness. Ailyn sensed it the moment she stepped outside the seamstress's shop. People looked at her a fraction too long. Some offered hesitant smiles, the polite kind given to someone suddenly of interest. Others stared with open curiosity, whispering behind gloved hands. She understood none of their words, but she felt the shift as clearly as a touch to the shoulder. She tightened her shawl and walked quickly toward the market square. She needed thread for the seamstress before midday, and she preferred to finish her errands unseen. But whispers trailed her like a breath of cold air. She avoided eye contact, pretending she did not notice. Near the fishmonger's stall, two women stood talking. One nudged the other when Ailyn approached. Their mouths moved briskly. One of them tilted her head with sympathy that felt sharp enough to cut. Ailyn turned away, clutching her basket tighter. She did not know what troubled her more, the ridicule from yesterday or the sudden fascination today. Neither felt safe. She hurried to the next stall. The vendor greeted her, speaking cheerfully, his lips forming shapes she could not decipher. When she did not respond, his expression faltered. He tried again, slower, but the sound still dissolved into silence. She shook her head and reached for a skein of thread, hoping the action would speak for her. He frowned and raised his voice slightly, likely without meaning to. Several people looked over. Ailyn felt the familiar ache press against her ribs. Before she could gesture an explanation, a gentle hand tapped the vendor's arm. The baker's wife stepped forward, signing in her limited, clumsy gestures. She did not know the language well, but she knew enough to say, "She cannot hear you. She wants that spool." Relief washed over Elin. The vendor nodded quickly and handed it to her with an apologetic look. Elin mouthed her thanks, hoping he could read it. As she turned to leave, the baker's wife caught her sleeve. Her expression held both warmth and hesitation. She signed slowly. "A duke spoke to you yesterday, is that true?" Elin's stomach tightened. She looked down, unsure how to answer. Silence often protected her, but this question felt different. Dangerous in a soft, unexpected way. She signed, "He helped me order soup." Nothing more. The baker's wife nodded, though her eyes suggested she knew the town would not accept such a simple explanation. People rarely did. Elin thanked her for the help and walked on, though unease clung to her like mist. When she turned onto the quieter road leading back to the seamstress's shop, she saw someone waiting at the corner, a thin man with a cap pulled low. She paused. He froze too, as if realizing she had noticed him sooner than he intended. His face brightened with recognition. He lifted a hand, not in greeting, but in a cautious request for her attention. Elin's breath faltered. She knew that face. Older, worn by time, but familiar in the way old memories clung to the edges of the heart. He approached slowly. She considered turning away, but something in his posture stopped her. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded envelope. He held it out to her with both hands, as though presenting something fragile. Elin hesitated before taking it. Her fingers brushed his, and he stepped back quickly, nodding for her to open it. The paper trembled as she unfolded it. Her father's handwriting appeared at once, uneven, shaken, but unmistakably his. Her heart tightened with a mixture of anger and longing. She read the words silently. "My dearest Elin, if this reaches you, then Providence has granted me one last mercy. I pray you can forgive me, though I know I do not deserve such grace. I should have stayed. I should have been the father your mother begged me to be, but fear and ruin made a coward of me." Elin's vision blurred. She blinked hard and kept going. "I have little time left. Illness has found me and regrets weigh heavier than breath. Before I go, I must warn you of one truth I hid, thinking it would keep you safe. There are people who must never know who you truly are. The past holds dangers more powerful than I ever realized." Her fingers tightened around the letter, especially the family of Black Thistle. The words struck like a blow. She read them twice, unable to breathe for several seconds. The man who had delivered the letter held up his hands and gestured for her attention. He pointed to his chest, then to the letter, then to the sky with a solemn look. He mouthed a single word she knew well from years of watching lips. "Dead." Her heart squeezed. She had prepared herself for this news long ago, but hearing it, or rather seeing it, still sent a hollow ache through her. He gestured again, writing invisible words in the air. He had been sent to find her, to deliver this, to warn her. Elin shook her head slowly. She could not understand why her father insisted she hide from a family she had never met. She signed, "Why? What danger? What truth?" The man hesitated, then gestured that she should walk with him. They moved to a quieter alley where no one else lingered. There he pulled out a small, worn notebook. He flipped through several pages and pointed to a paragraph written in a hurried hand. She read it. "Your mother left the MacDougall family in disgrace. Secrets were buried. Promises broken. If they ever learn who you are, history may repeat itself." Elin's chest tightened with confusion and fear. She signed, "What secrets? What did she do?" The man's expression told her he knew only fragments. He shrugged helplessly. He made a gesture that meant hidden, another that meant dangerous, and another that meant protect. She closed her eyes. Everything felt suddenly uncertain. The gentle warmth Alistair had shown her now felt fragile, threatened by a past she could not see clearly. She did not know whether her father's fears were justified, but she knew the MacDougall name carried weight, and weight could crush. When she opened her eyes, the man touched her arm gently to offer comfort. She stepped back, not unkindly, but overwhelmed. She held up her hand. Enough. She needed time to breathe, to think. He nodded and stepped away, pulling his cap lower. Before he left, he signed something simple. "Be careful." Then he disappeared into the mist. Elin stood alone, clutching the letter. Her breath trembled. She forced herself to walk, though each step felt heavier than the last. When she reached her room again, she shut the door and leaned against it. She read the letter once more, her heart straining under its weight. The Duke, the man who had been kind to her, the man who had spoken her language with gentle hands. Could he truly be connected to dangers from her mother's past? She did not want to believe it, but she had learned long ago that life rarely shaped itself according to desire. She folded the letter and hid it beneath the loose floorboard under her bed. For a long moment she sat with her hands pressed to her temples, fighting the urge to weep. Later that afternoon, when she emerged to return the thread to the seamstress, the air in the stairwell felt colder. She stepped out into the street and nearly collided with a man hurrying in the opposite direction. She steadied herself, apologizing with a quick gesture. The man nodded, stepping aside. But as she walked away, she did not see the troubled look he cast back at her. She did not see him whisper to himself, as though confirming a fear. She did not see him hurry toward the main road with urgency. She did not see him murmur the words that would soon reach the ears of those who should never have heard them, especially the Duke of Black Thistle. Alistair returned to Inverness the next morning with the same urgency that had pulled him away. The road from his estate was long, but he had left before sunrise, driven by a restless weight he could not cast off. He had spent the night wrestling with family matters, papers, accounts, and an argument he wished he had never entertained. Yet through it all he kept seeing a young woman in a dimly lit tavern, her hands trembling as she tried to make herself understood. When he pushed open the tavern door, the same warmth greeted him, but nothing else was the same. People stiffened at the sight of him. A few offered bows. Others pretended not to stare. But she was not there. He crossed the room, ignoring the sudden hush. He asked the server something. The man looked flustered and pointed toward the town square. Alistair thanked him and left at once. The square bustled with morning activity. Vendors called out prices, though their voices reached him like a blur. His mind was elsewhere. He scanned the faces until he saw her near the seamstress stall, her shawl pulled close, her basket held tight against her hip. Relief washed through him more powerfully than expected. He approached slowly, so as not to alarm her. When she sensed a presence beside her, she looked up with surprise. Her eyes widened when she recognized him. Her hands rose hesitantly. "You returned so soon." His own hands answered. "I meant to return yesterday. I apologize that I could not." She shook her head, telling him no apology was needed. But she kept glancing around, uneasy. People were watching again, too many. Their whispers lingered like invisible threads in the air. Alistair stepped slightly closer, instinctively shielding her from the stares. He signed, "May we walk? There is a quieter place nearby." She hesitated, then nodded. They walked toward the riverbank, where the morning mist clung low to the ground and the noise of the market softened. Elin kept her gaze on the path, trying to steady her thoughts. The memory of the letter weighed on her like a stone in her pocket, though she had left it hidden beneath the floorboard. When they reached the water, Alistair stopped. His expression had changed, gentler, shaded with something personal. He signed, "Yesterday I left more abruptly than I wished. My estate needed me, but I thought of our conversation." Elin's fingers moved before she could stop them. So did I. He seemed encouraged by her honesty. He stepped closer, careful not to invade her space. "I hope I did not cause you trouble." She shook her head. "Trouble follows me without your help." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. She wanted to tell him everything. The letter, the warning, the man who delivered it. But fear pressed hard against her voice, even in silence. Instead she signed, "People talk. They wonder why a duke would speak with someone like me." He looked genuinely confused. "Someone like you?" She stared at the ground. "Deaf, poor, unimportant." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I wish society valued people by character instead of circumstance." She glanced at him, surprised by the firmness in his expression. He continued, "My sister faced the same stares. People judged her without knowing her. They assumed silence meant ignorance. They were wrong." Elin watched his hands move, each gesture filled with quiet sincerity. "Your sister," she signed. "She was deaf too." He nodded. "She was younger than I. clever, kind, often overlooked. I learned the signs so she would never feel alone. But then, his hands paused. The wind stirred. He swallowed, unable to finish. Elin lowered her gaze out of respect. She signed softly. I am sorry. He nodded once, grateful. Silence settled between them, not the heavy kind, but the thoughtful kind. Elin felt a strange warmth grow in her chest, watching him gaze out at the river, as though searching for something he had lost long ago. She wanted to ask about his sister, but before she could, he turned to her with a new question. You seemed troubled in the square. Is something wrong? Her heart kicked. She shook her head quickly. No. He tilted his head. Elin. She looked away sharply, her hands trembling. She signed, please do not ask. He paused, trying to read the fear she tried to hide. He nodded slowly. Very well, but if you ever wish to tell me, I will listen. Her lips parted, surprised by the gentleness in his offer. She forced a small nod. They stood by the river for another moment before he signed again, more lightly this time. May I walk you back? She hesitated, but the warmth in his expression eased her tension. She gave a reluctant yes. As they walked through the narrow streets, whispers stirred again. A few women paused mid-step. A man carrying a crate nearly dropped it. The presence of a duke beside a quiet, modestly dressed young woman caused ripples wherever they passed. Elin felt her cheeks warm. She kept her gaze straight ahead, but every stare pressed against her skin. She wondered how Alistair remained so composed. He seemed untouched by judgment, focused only on her hands when she spoke. When they reached the seamstress's shop, Alistair stopped. His eyes lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. He signed, May I see you again? She felt her pulse quicken. She should have said no. She should have protected herself. But the truth settled in her hands before she could resist. Yes. A faint smile touched his mouth. Then tomorrow, if you allow it. She nodded once, trying not to let hope betray her expression. He inclined his head, then stepped back. Before he could walk away, a carriage thundered down the street. The driver reined the horses sharply, and a woman stepped out with practiced grace. Elin's breath froze. The woman wore a dark traveling cloak, her posture straight as a blade. She had the unmistakable air of nobility, composed, elegant, observant. Her eyes swept the street and landed at once on Alistair. Alistair stiffened. Rowena, the woman approached briskly. Cousin, I have searched half the town for you. Elin watched their exchange, feeling herself shrink with each passing second. Rowena MacDougall looked her up and down, not cruelly, but with the calculating intensity of someone accustomed to evaluating every detail. Rowena turned to Alistair. There are matters at the estate that cannot wait. Your steward sent word you must come at once. Alistair's jaw tightened. Can it not wait a few hours? Rowena lowered her voice, though Elin caught the sharpness in her gaze. No, it most certainly cannot. Your absence has already been noted. Elin felt herself withdraw instinctively. She took a small step back, careful not to draw attention, but Rowena noticed. Her expression softened into polite concern, though politeness carried edges sharper than knives. Forgive my abruptness, she told Elin with crisp diction. I did not mean to intrude on whatever this is. Elin bowed her head slightly. Rowena turned back to Alistair. Her voice lowered again. People are watching. You must be cautious. Alistair's eyes darkened. I will not be spoken to as though I am misbehaving. Rowena sighed, weary. I am trying to protect you. And the family. Elin's stomach tightened. She sensed tension buried beneath their exchange, tangled in expectations she did not understand. Alistair looked back at Elin, his expression shifting to something apologetic. I must attend to this, he signed discreetly. But I will return. She managed a nod, though doubt clouded her eyes. Rowena watched her closely, too closely. As though she recognized something she could not yet name, Alistair stepped into the carriage beside his cousin. Rowena cast one last glance at Elin before the horses started forward. It was not a hostile look, not cruel, but it carried a question she clearly wished to answer. Elin watched the carriage disappear into the mist. She wrapped her arms around herself and stepped back toward the shop door. She did not see Rowena lean toward Alistair inside the carriage. She did not hear the quiet, uneasy whisper. If she is who I believe she is, this could ruin everything. Eileen spent the rest of the afternoon trying to work, but her thoughts tangled with every movement of the needle. The seamstress scolded her twice for pricking the fabric, and once more for drifting into silence so deep she did not notice a customer at the door. Eileen apologized each time with small gestures, but her hands trembled more with each apology. When evening fell, she returned to her room above the shop. She closed the door softly, as though loudness, heard or unheard, might shatter the fragile balance of her life. The letter beneath the floorboard seemed to pulse with quiet menace. She paced the room, unable to ignore it any longer. Finally she knelt, lifted the loose board, and retrieved the folded paper. Her father's words stared back at her, especially the family of Black Thistle. Her breath shook. She dropped the letter as if it had burned her. Alistair's face rose in her mind. His gentle hands, his steady eyes, the way he had listened, the way he had returned, the way he had looked at her, as though silence did not diminish her. She pressed a hand to her chest, wishing she could silence her own fear. But fear had followed her for years. It knew her far too well. A knock at her door startled her. She froze. The seamstress's voice came muffled through the wood, telling her someone asked for her downstairs. A man waiting by the shop counter. Eileen's heart tightened. Only one person came to mind. She hurried down the stairs and stepped into the small shop. But instead of Alistair, she found the same thin man who had delivered her father's letter. He stood near the counter, hat in hand, shifting uneasily. Eileen's pulse quickened. She approached slowly. He gestured in greeting, then reached into his coat once more. He pulled out a folded page torn from the same notebook as before. He placed it on the counter and tapped it gently, urging her to read. It contained a few hastily written lines. Your father feared the wrong people, but not without reason. Your mother fled to protect you from a secret that belongs to two families, not one. If the McDougalls discover your parentage, everything will unravel. Eileen's throat tightened. She signed quickly. What does this mean? What secret? He hesitated, then steepled his fingers together in a gesture that suggested a union. He pointed to Eileen, then to the words, then shook his head. She frowned, confused. He tried again. This time he pointed to her, then formed a gesture that meant child. He pointed to the letter, then toward the seamstress's stairs where her room lay. He finished by lifting his hands in a motion that meant hidden. Eileen understood the pieces, but they refused to form a whole. She signed in frustration, tell me plainly. He looked around nervously, as if someone might be watching. No one else was in the shop, but he stepped closer anyway and whispered something she could not hear. His lips moved in a name she recognized in the shape alone. McDougal. Eileen stumbled backward. He reached out, steadying her lightly, though even his touch felt like an intrusion. She shook him off, shaking her head in disbelief. No, she signed fiercely. No, that cannot be. His eyes softened with sympathy. He pointed again to the written words, then added one more line in hurried script. Ask no one. Trust no one. Not yet. Eileen's hands trembled uncontrollably. She wanted to scream, but screams had never belonged to her. All she had was breath and panic and a churning heart. The man placed a small pouch of coins on the counter. Payment for your father's last request. She pushed it back. He frowned, but she insisted, her hands striking the air with a decisive gesture. He sighed, placing his hat back on his head. He gave her one more warning look. Then he slipped out into the street, his silhouette swallowed by mist. Eileen stood frozen. Her mother had worked for the McDougal family. That much she knew from the letter. But what else? What secret had been buried so deeply that her father had spent years running from its shadow? She climbed the stairs back to her room, holding the folded page like something poisonous. Once inside, she collapsed onto the bed and covered her face with her hands. She stayed that way until exhaustion forced her to lie back. She stared at the ceiling, feeling the walls tilt and shift around her. A soft tap on the window made her jolt upright, but it was only a branch in the wind. She pressed a hand to her racing heart. She could not keep living with half-truths and warnings. She needed answers. She needed clarity. But there were only two people in the world who might hold those answers, and both were part of the very past she had been told to fear. Her mother, who was gone, and Alistair's family. The thought sent a painful twist through her chest. Alistair. He had treated her with kindness, with patience, with understanding. But what if his compassion changed when he learned who she was? What if his family had been the source of her mother's disgrace? What if her presence reopened wounds she had never known existed? A knock sounded on her door again. She nearly leapt from the bed. The seamstress's voice came muffled, her lips forming words Elin could barely decipher. "There is someone downstairs, asking for you." Elin's stomach dropped. She knew. She felt it. Her steps were slow as she descended the stairs. She held the railing tightly, her breath uneven. At the bottom, near the counter where the man had stood moments before, she now saw Alistair. His posture was straighter than earlier that day. His coat was dusted with cold. His eyes locked onto her with unmistakable relief. He stepped toward her at once. Elin, her heart clenched painfully. She lifted her hands, though she did not know what to say. Alistair signed, "I came as soon as I could. There was more trouble at the estate than I expected. I am sorry for the delay." She nodded faintly. He watched her carefully. "You seem distressed. Did someone trouble you?" She looked away. She could not tell him, not yet. The warning echoed in her mind with terrifying weight. "Your mother fled that family. If they discover who you are..." Her hands began to shake. Alistair noticed. His expression tightened with concern. "Elin, please." "What happened?" She shook her head, taking a step back. His brows knit together, worry deepening. He reached out gently, stopping before touching her, letting her decide. His hand hovered, steady, warm, patient. "You can trust me," he signed. "Whatever it is, you may tell me." Her breath shuddered. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to fall into the comfort of those words. But fear closed around her like a fist. She lifted her hands, ready to confess. And then the shop door burst open. A carriage had stopped outside, and a young man in a black coat stepped in with urgent eyes. He carried a message sealed with wax. He looked from the seamstress to Alistair, then bowed clumsily. "Your Grace, forgive me, but you are needed at once. The matter concerns your family estate." Alistair's jaw tightened. "Again?" The man held out the letter. The seal was unmistakable, official, heavy, serious. Alistair exhaled sharply and took it. He broke the seal and read quickly. His expression changed, darkened, sharpened, hardened into something he rarely let anyone see. Helen stepped back, startled by the shift. Alistair folded the letter with deliberate care and looked at her, regret in every line of his face. "I must go," he signed. "I am sorry." She swallowed hard, nodding once. He hesitated, as though wanting desperately to say more, to reassure her, to explain himself. But duty pulled at him with merciless force. He lifted his hand in a gesture that felt far too final. "I will return." She wanted to believe that. She tried to give him a steady nod. He turned to leave. But just before he stepped through the door, the messenger whispered something Elin could not hear. She saw only the shapes of the words on the young man's lips. They matched the warning in her father's letter. MacDougall. Danger. Her. Alistair stiffened. He turned back toward her slowly, and she saw the disbelief in his eyes, the question rising in his expression, the dawning recognition he had never expected to find. He spoke her name. Alistair appeared at her door, having heard enough to know something is terribly wrong. Alistair stood in the doorway, framed by cold wind and a tension so sharp Elin felt it before she understood it. He did not move. He only watched her, his eyes searching her face as if piecing together a puzzle that frightened him. The messenger slipped away discreetly, sensing the moment was not meant for witnesses. The seamstress stepped back into her workroom. The shop fell silent except for the soft tremor Elin felt beneath her feet. A carriage rolling past outside, or perhaps her own heartbeat. Alistair stepped inside and closed the door behind him with unusual care. He approached slowly, and she could not tell whether he feared startling her or feared what he might learn. His hands rose. "Elin, what is happening?" She looked down, unable to meet his gaze. Her fingers twitched, but formed no words. The letter's warnings pulsed in her memory, each one louder than the last. He waited a long moment. When she remained silent, he stepped closer, his expression tightening with quiet worry. "Someone spoke of you at the estate. he signed. Someone who claimed they knew your family. Her breath caught. Her hands closed into trembling fists. He continued, they said your mother once worked in my household. They said she left under painful circumstances. Elin swallowed hard. Her vision blurred for an instant. She shook her head, trying to push back the rising panic. Alistair gently reached toward her hand, but stopped just short, asking permission with a simple, steady look. She did not pull away. His fingertips brushed hers lightly, barely a touch, yet the comfort in that brief contact nearly undid her. He signed, you can tell me the truth, whatever it is. She forced her hands to move. My father wrote to me before he died. He warned me to stay away from your family. Alistair's expression shifted with surprise and worry, but not anger. He answered, why? What reason did he give? Elin hesitated, then shaped the answer with painful slowness. Secrets. Things that happened before I was born. Things my mother never told me. He nodded thoughtfully. What kind of secrets? She shook her head. I do not know. His eyes darkened with frustration, not at her, but at the shadows surrounding them. If someone has frightened you, I will... She cut him off sharply. No, no promises. His hands stilled. She looked away, unable to face him. Her fingers spelled out the truth she feared most. I do not want to be a problem to you. Alistair stepped closer, his presence warm despite the cold drifting in from the door. You are not a problem, he signed with firm clarity. Someone pounded on the shop door before she could answer. Alistair turned, startled. Elin stepped back, heart racing. The seamstress peeked out from the workroom, startled by the sudden noise. The pounding came again. Alistair opened the door. Lady Rowena stood on the threshold, her cloak soaked from the lingering drizzle and her expression drawn with urgency. Her gaze travelled over Alistair, then shifted swiftly to Elin. Rowena exhaled sharply. Thank heaven I found you both. Alistair stiffened. Both? Rowena stepped inside, shutting out the wind behind her. She drew herself upright, torn between propriety and haste, her eyes fixed on Elin, not with hostility, but with an uncomfortable mixture of recognition and restraint. Elin tensed, pulling her shawl tighter. Rowena spoke quickly. Alistair, before you hear this from someone less suited to deliver it, I must tell you what I've learned. He frowned. About what? Rowena glanced at Elin again. About her. Elin's stomach dropped, her knees wobbled. Alistair stepped closer to her instinctively, as though shielding her from an unseen threat. Rowena took a breath, then addressed Elin directly. Your mother, Margaret Fraser, once served as governess to my aunt's children. She came from a modest but respectable family. Many praised her kindness, and many envied her. Elin's breath hitched, but she stayed silent. Rowena continued, choosing her words with care. There was an incident. Not of scandal, as the town gossips whispered, but of resentment. A noblewoman accused your mother unjustly. The family dismissed her to avoid conflict. Margaret left without revealing she was with child. Elin pressed a hand to her chest. She felt the world tilt, though only slightly. A truth edged with pain, but not the catastrophe she'd feared. Rowena watched her carefully. When your mother disappeared, rumors spread among the servants. Rumors that she carried a child belonging to a member of our household. Elin's pulse quickened violently. She shook her head, trembling. Alistair's face drained of colour. Rowena. Stop. That is a cruel assumption, and entirely unfounded. Rowena nodded. I know. Which is why I am telling you both now, before anyone else distorts the story. Margaret left to protect her child from gossip, not because of wrongdoing. The truth is simpler, quieter, and far less damning. Elin pressed her lips together, struggling to breathe evenly. Alistair signed softly. Elin, this is not your fault. But Rowena wasn't finished. She reached into her cloak and withdrew a small framed miniature portrait. Its paint slightly faded, its edges worn by years of handling. She held it out to Elin. Elin stared, frozen. It was her mother. You kept this, Elin signed shakily. Rowena nodded. My aunt never forgot her. Margaret was loved by many in our household. Her departure troubled everyone, especially my uncle. Elin's hands trembled so hard she could barely form words. Why tell me this now? Rowena looked briefly at Alistair before answering. Because I overheard something today. A servant travelling from another estate claimed that Margaret's daughter, the child she hid, was living in Inverness, that someone had seen her, that someone was looking for her. Aileen's blood ran cold. She stepped back, her breath hitching. Her mind raced through every warning, every shadow, every whispered fear. Rowena raised both hands in a gesture of calm. "Aileen, listen, not all dangers are real. Rumours become truths when left to wander. I came because," she hesitated, choosing her words, "because I feared what those rumours would become if handled by the wrong people." Alistair turned sharply toward Rowena. "Who is looking for her?" Rowena folded her hands. "I do not know. But the man spreading the rumour claimed she might be a threat to old family secrets." Aileen felt faint. Alistair stepped directly in front of her, a protective instinct he didn't bother to hide. His hands formed sharp, deliberate gestures. "Aileen stays under my protection until I know what we face." Rowena narrowed her eyes. "Alistair," he ignored her, turning to Aileen. "We will face this together." Aileen opened her mouth to deny him, to protest, to flee. But her hands refused to move. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Rowena watched them both with a complicated gaze. "You must understand," she told Alistair, "that protecting her may invite scrutiny." "Then let them scrutinize me," he snapped. Rowena's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Aileen forced her hands to rise. "Alistair, I cannot—" "You can," he signed firmly. "And you will not face this alone." She shook her head, tears forming. "You do not understand what my father—" Alistair stepped closer. "Then tell me." She pressed a hand to her temple, overwhelmed. She saw her father's words flashing in her mind, warning her, urging her to remain hidden. She wanted to obey him. She wanted to believe Alistair. She wanted to trust her own trembling heart. Before she could choose, a new shadow crossed the doorway. All three turned. A tall man stood there. One Aileen recognized instantly, the man who had brought her father's letter. His face was pale from the wind, his breath sharp, his eyes wide. He pointed at Aileen, then at Alistair, and mouthed words she recognized without hearing them. They know who she is." Alistair turned to Aileen in shock. The messenger's warning struck the room like a blow. The man pointed again, urgent and shaking. "They are coming here." Aileen froze where she stood, unable to breathe, unable to think. The thin man who had brought her father's warnings stood trembling in the doorway, his eyes darting between her and Alistair with desperate urgency. His chest rose and fell too fast, as though he had run the entire length of Inverness. Alistair stepped forward, shoulders tense. "Who is coming?" he demanded, though he spoke aloud. Aileen saw only the shape of the words, sharp and edged with command. The man pointed down the street, mouthing hurried syllables she could not hear. His lips formed enough shapes for her to understand the fragments. Men, from the estate, questions, searching. Rowena paled. She looked at Alistair with sudden, alarmed clarity. "They must have learned the rumour," she murmured. "They must have heard Margaret's daughter was found." Aileen's heart lurched painfully. She shook her head again and again, stepping backward until she felt the wall against her spine. She wanted to deny everything, to run, to hide, to disappear. But her feet would not move. Alistair turned back to her. "Aileen, stay calm. We will not let anything happen to you." She lifted her shaking hands. "Why are they coming? What do they want?" Rowena answered before Alistair could. "They want confirmation. If they believe you are Margaret's child, they will want to question you, privately, discreetly." She hesitated, perhaps forcefully. Aileen's breath caught. She pressed her back harder against the wall as though it might swallow her whole. Alistair glared at Rowena. "You are scaring her unnecessarily." Rowena snapped back. "I am preparing her. Something you seem reluctant to do." Before he could answer, the man in the doorway interrupted with frantic gestures. He pointed outside, then shoved the door closed with both hands, leaning against it as if someone were right behind him. Aileen felt vibrations through the floorboards, steps, several of them, approaching at a steady pace. The seamstress peered out from her workroom, frightened. "Should I call someone?" she mouthed silently. Aileen shook her head sharply. No. No attention. No spectacle. Rowena stepped closer to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see. She inhaled sharply. Two men, well-dressed. from another estate. Alistair moved to her side. Do you recognize them? Rowena nodded. One serves Lord Cromwell. The other, she swallowed, is my uncle's solicitor. Aileen's pulse thudded painfully in her throat. She remembered her father's line, "There are people who must never know who you truly are." The footsteps grew louder, closer. Alistair turned to Rowena. "Stall them." Rowena blinked. "Me?" "They will listen to you," he insisted. "Tell them they are mistaken. Tell them the girl they seek is not here." Rowena hesitated, torn. Alistair added, "And keep them outside." That decided it. Rowena squared her shoulders and stepped out of the shop, pulling the door closed behind her. Aileen watched through the window's corner. She saw Rowena greet the two men with stiff politeness. She saw them bow. She saw questions begin, sharp, insistent, pointed. Aileen backed away from the window and slumped into the nearest chair, her breath trembling out of control. She covered her face with her hands. Alistair knelt in front of her at once. "Aileen, look at me." She shook her head weakly. He touched her wrist, gentle and careful, waiting until she lowered her hands. His eyes met hers with steady calm. "You are safe here. Do you understand?" Her hands rose slowly. "If they take me away, no one will take you anywhere," he signed firmly. Her breath hitched. She forced her fingers to speak. "You don't know what they want." His answer was steady. "Then we will find out together." Her throat tightened. "No," she signed. "It is dangerous for you, too." He shook his head. "I am responsible for what happens on my estate. If someone acts in my name without my consent, I will face them. Not you." His confidence steadied her, only slightly, but enough for breath to return. The thin man stepped closer, gesturing anxiously. He mouthed another phrase Aileen understood. "I should not stay. They know I delivered the letter." He turned and hurried into the back of the shop, disappearing out a rear exit. Aileen felt no relief, only dread. Outside, Rowena's conversation became tense enough for even Aileen to sense it through the vibrations on the window pane. Alistair rose and peeked outside as well. Rowena's gestures grew sharper. The men leaned in closer, questioning her. Aileen's stomach twisted. After a full minute, Rowena returned and shut the door quickly behind her. She exhaled hard. "They want to speak with her," she whispered to Alistair. "Immediately. They say the matter involves the protection of family reputation." Aileen's hands flew up. "No." Rowena held up a hand. "I told them she was a seamstress's apprentice and nothing more. I insisted they were mistaken, but they heard a rumor, and they want answers." "What rumor?" Alistair demanded. Rowena hesitated. "That Margaret's child survived, and that she may have a claim." Aileen stared at her, unable to breathe. "A claim to what?" Rowena spoke slowly. "To land, to inheritance, to family obligations that were never resolved." Alistair's expression darkened. "That is impossible." Rowena nodded. "That is what I told them, but they are determined to verify who she is. They said they will return with letters and documents." Aileen felt the room tilt. She grabbed the back of a chair to stay upright. Rowena turned to her. "Aileen, do you know nothing of your mother's past?" Aileen shook her head violently. "Nothing. I know nothing." She sensed Rowena's sympathy, but sympathy was salt where she needed air. Alistair touched her arm, grounding her. "Whatever they suspect, we will manage it." She lifted trembling hands. "You cannot protect me from something you do not understand." His jaw tightened. "Then tell me." Her breath faltered. She wanted to. She wanted to tell him everything. She lifted her hands, hesitated, lowered them, lifted them again. Her past felt like broken glass between her palms. Finally she signed, "My mother left here in disgrace. My father hid me so I would not carry her shame. He died warning me to stay hidden from your family." Alistair's composure wavered. Rowena's eyes widened. "He warned you about us?" Aileen nodded. "He said danger would follow me if I was found." "He did not explain why." Rowena's voice was quiet. "If he wanted to protect you, he must have feared a specific person." "Which person?" Aileen signed quickly. Rowena hesitated, then answered with visible reluctance. "My uncle." Aileen's hands went cold. Rowena continued. "He was the one who dismissed your mother," harshly, cruelly, without letting her defend herself. If he believed she bore a child connected to the household, he would have tried to erase any trace of her existence. Eileen's pulse hammered in her ears. Alistair shook his head. My uncle had no right. Rowena cut him off. It was years ago. He wanted to avoid scandal. Society was merciless. He acted out of fear and pride, not malice. Eileen signed bitterly. Malice feels the same from where I stand. Rowena flinched. Alistair stepped toward Eileen. His hands moved with firm conviction. Listen to me. None of this changes how I see you, none of it. She stared at him, her breath catching. But before she could answer, footsteps approached again outside. All three froze. Rowena peered through the window and whispered, They brought another man, an older one. I think they brought a magistrate. Eileen's knees weakened. She gripped the counter. Alistair's eyes hardened. Enough. He strode to the door, but Eileen caught his sleeve. He turned back sharply, and she signed with fierce urgency, Do not let them see me, not yet. He hesitated. Eileen, if you hide, they will assume guilt. If I appear, they may take me, she answered. Her trembling hands settled into the shape of a plea. Please, please let me think. Give me time. Alistair stared at her, torn between honor and the visceral need to protect her. Then, slowly, he nodded. Rowena watched the exchange, understanding flickering across her face. Come. There is a back room. Go quickly. Eileen moved, but her steps were shaky. Alistair followed closely, guiding her with one hand lightly at her back. The seamstress stepped aside, wide-eyed, but silent. Rowena pointed them toward a narrow hallway behind the workroom. Eileen slipped inside, just as the shop door swung open again. Voices filled the front room, sharp, official, demanding. Alistair stood in the doorway of the back room, watching her with a promise in his eyes he did not have time to sign. She waited, heart pounding, breath shallow. She could not hear what the men said, but she could see Alistair's jaw tighten with every word, could see Rowena standing stiff beside him, defending her with every ounce of steel she possessed, could see the magistrate step closer with a document in hand, and she could see, in the shape of Alistair's turning head, in the cut of his eyes, one truth she had dreaded from the moment the warning letter arrived. They were asking for her by name. Eileen pressed herself against the wall of the narrow back room, her breath coming in shallow bursts. The dim light flickered over bolts of cloth stacked on shelves, but she barely saw them. She focused on her hands, clenching and unclenching them, as though that alone could steady her pulse. Through the doorway she saw the shapes of mouths moving, voices she could not hear, arguments she could not decipher, demands thrown like stones she could only feel in the tremor of the shop floor. Every vibration made her flinch. Rowena stood rigid, shoulders straight, chin lifted. Alistair stood at her side, posture taut with defiance. The magistrate faced them squarely, flanked by two well-dressed men who looked both self-important and irritated. One held a leather-bound ledger. The other carried folded documents. Eileen could not hear their voices, but she saw their impatience. Their movements were sharp, clipped, confident in their authority. Rowena spoke first, addressing them with controlled resolve. Her lips formed clear, disciplined shapes. No. Mistaken. No reason. Rumors. One man stepped forward, gesturing toward the ledger. His mouth shaped the words record, employment, Margaret Fraser. Eileen's stomach twisted. Rowena's answer held the edge of practiced diplomacy. Allegations? Dismissed. No child mentioned. The magistrate raised a hand, interrupting her. His brows lowered, lips forming the unmistakable shapes of request and must comply. Eileen's breath caught. She squeezed her hands together so tightly her knuckles whitened. Alistair answered next. His voice carried enough force that she felt it through the floorboards. She saw the muscles in his jaw tighten, his words forming a firm defense. He gave no permission. He rejected their demands. The magistrate held up a sealed document in response. Rowena's eyes widened. Alistair's expression sharpened. The magistrate's mouth formed a phrase Eileen understood instantly, even in silence. Legal authority to inquire. Her knees weakened. She leaned against a shelf to stay standing. In the front room, Alistair stepped closer to the magistrate, speaking with lowered voice but unmistakable tension. Rowena reached for his arm, urging caution, but he shook her off gently, never breaking his stare. The magistrate spoke again, addressing Rowena this time. His lips shaped the name Margaret, then Elin, then Child of Record. Elin's pulse slammed. She pressed her hand hard over her mouth to stop herself from gasping, though she made no sound. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. Footsteps, heavy ones. Someone moved toward the hallway. Alistair blocked the magistrate's path immediately. Rowena stepped beside him, her chin lifting higher. Elin caught her lips forming. No cause, no proof. The solicitor stepped forward with a paper, pointing toward the back of the shop. His expression carried certainty and something like vindication. Alistair snatched the paper from the man's hand, scanning it. His face darkened. He muttered something sharp, and even without hearing the words, Elin recognized the tone of a man losing patience. He tore the paper in half. Rowena's eyes widened. The solicitor gasped. The magistrate stepped back in shock. The floor trembled beneath Elin's feet from the force of Alistair's next words. She didn't hear them, but she knew their meaning. "The shop is private property. You will not enter without cause." The solicitor pointed at Alistair angrily, shaping words like obstruction and interference. Alistair answered with calm disdain. Rowena stepped forward, hands clasped behind her back with precise nobility. She addressed the men firmly, her lips shaping the words reputation, unfounded rumors, and family concern. The magistrate hesitated. Rowena pressed on. She leaned closer, speaking with quiet authority. Elin could not catch the details, but she saw the effect. Uncertainty flickering across the magistrate's face, doubt creeping into his posture. The solicitor tried once more, but Rowena raised a hand with impeccable command. She gave a final statement, each word shaped with dignity and crisp discipline. The magistrate looked between the two MacDougalls, one noble, one resolute, and finally relented with a stiff bow. He signaled the others. They stepped back toward the door, muttering. Before leaving, the solicitor pointed a warning finger. His mouth shaped the words, "We will return." The magistrate echoed enough that even Elin caught it. This is not finished. The three men stepped outside. Rowena followed to ensure they left the vicinity. The seamstress sank onto a stool with relief. Alistair remained frozen in place, breathing hard. Elin watched him, fearful, grateful, confused, all at once. She stepped forward from the shadows, unsure whether she should reveal herself. He turned at the slightest movement, eyes finding hers immediately. He strode toward her, stopping only inches away. His hands lifted. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. His fingers moved again, slower now. "Elin, I'm sorry, this should not have happened." She raised her own hands, still trembling. "It is not your fault." He hesitated, then touched her elbow lightly, steadying her, inviting her to breathe. She signed. "They asked for me by name." He nodded grimly. "They believe you may have a claim upon something your mother never took." Elin felt the words like cold water. "I do not want anything from them," she answered fiercely. "Not land, not money, nothing." Alistair watched her with quiet intensity. His expression softened, but not with pity, with something deeper. "I know," he signed, "but some men do not care what you want. They care only for what threatens them." Her hands slowed. "Why would I be a threat?" Alistair looked down before answering. "Because your mother was wronged, and because truth unsettles those who depended on silence." Elin's breath faltered. She pressed her fingers to her lips, shaking her head. "I do not understand." He lifted his hand as if to touch her cheek, but stopped himself. "Some things may be easier shown than spoken." She frowned, puzzled. Rowena re-entered the shop just then. Her cloak was damp from mist, but her gaze was sharp. "They are gone for now," she said, "but they will return. And next time they will bring questions you cannot avoid." Elin swallowed. "Why do they want me?" Rowena studied her face, then spoke slowly, carefully. "They believe your birth may complicate an old agreement, a matter of inheritance that should have been settled years ago, a distant trust, a forgotten land grant, something connected to Margaret's years in our household." Elin shook her head. "I want none of it. I want only to live quietly." Rowena's voice softened. "I believe you. But the world is rarely that simple." Elin wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. Alistair stepped closer to Rowena. Enough shadows. She deserves the truth. Rowena hesitated. Her gaze flicked between them, as if weighing loyalty against compassion. At last she reached into her cloak and drew something out, a folded piece of parchment, yellowed at the edges. She placed it in Elin's hands with solemn care. "Your mother kept this," she said. "It was found among the estate papers my uncle hid. I do not know why he kept it, but he feared it would be discovered." Elin unfolded it slowly. Inside was a name she did not recognize. A signature she did. A date. A mark of guardianship. Her mother's handwriting. Her hands shook violently. Rowena spoke gently. "That document proves you were meant to be protected by our household, not hunted by it." Elin's chest tightened. She looked between Rowena and Alistair, trying to understand. Her hands formed the question with stark fear. "Then why did my father say your family was dangerous?" Rowena looked away in shame. "Because my uncle was," she admitted quietly. "Because he let pride destroy everything your mother tried to preserve." Elin felt air leave her lungs. Alistair stepped forward. His hands moved with a final, unavoidable truth. "Elin, I believe your mother was dismissed to cover a greater failure, a failure my family must answer for." She stared at him, heart pounding. He continued, "And I believe you deserve to know everything," Rowena added, "and someone else has come to Inverness who believes the same." Elin frowned. "Who?" Rowena turned toward the door. "Your mother's old friend, the one who knew the truth from the beginning." Alistair stiffened. Rowena lifted her chin toward the street. "He is coming here now." Elin stood very still as Rowena's words settled like dust in a quiet room. Someone who had known her mother, someone who carried answers, someone who might finally ease years of silence. For the first time since the trouble began, her fear loosened its grip just slightly, replaced by something gentler and more fragile. Hope. Alistair stepped closer, studying her face with the same careful attention he always gave her hands. His expression softened, no longer strained by confrontation or urgency. He signed slowly. "If this man knew your mother well, he may help us understand what she endured." Elin nodded, though her breath trembled. She wasn't afraid of the truth itself. She was afraid of what it might do to the fragile connection growing between them. Yet she wanted the truth more than she wanted safety. She wanted to reclaim the missing pieces of her story. Rowena moved toward the window, checking the street with subtle caution. She relaxed. He is alone. No men from the clan, no magistrate, only a traveler with a weary horse. Elin felt her heart beat faster. Her hands brushed her shawl, smoothing creases that were not there. She tried to prepare herself, though she did not know how. A soft knock sounded at the shop door, polite, uncertain, and nothing like the arrogant pounding of earlier. Alistair beckoned Elin to stand beside him, and she did, though she stayed half a step behind him. Rowena opened the door. The man who entered was older than Elin remembered, though she hadn't seen him since early childhood. His beard was silvered, his coat worn from travel. He carried his hat in his hands, turning it nervously, but his eyes, kind, deep, and sorrowful, were unmistakable. She knew him at once. Her father's friend, her mother's confidant, the only adult who ever signed with her after her mother died. She had forgotten his name, but not his presence, not the gentleness in his face. He saw her and froze. His mouth parted in shock. Slowly he lowered himself onto one knee, an act of respect rather than ritual, and looked up at her with eyes shining. "Elin, little Elin, you have grown." She understood the words from his lips alone. She knelt as well, reaching for him with shaking hands. He laughed softly and took her hands in both of his touch trembling. "I feared I would never find you." She swallowed hard. Her fingers moved quickly. "You knew my mother. You knew what happened." He nodded, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. I knew everything." Rowena closed the door quietly and stepped back to give them space. Alistair remained near, his expression steady but softened by the tenderness of the moment. The man sat in a chair, still holding one of Elin's hands, as if afraid she might vanish. He spoke slowly, allowing her to read each word while Alistair and Rowena listened with solemn attention. "Your mother was a good woman, kind to all, loved by the children she taught, but she was wronged, deeply." Elin's eyes stung, but she did not look away. He continued, "Her dismissal was not her fault. She refused to lie about something she saw in the household, something a noblewoman wished to keep hidden. That lady blamed her to protect her own reputation. Rowena stiffened, knowing exactly which relative he meant. "Your uncle's wife started the rumor," the man said gently. "Not your uncle. He was misled, embarrassed. He acted rashly, believing her." Alistair looked stricken. Elin squeezed the man's hand. "What rumor?" He exhaled, weary. "That your mother sought to manipulate the family, that she wanted influence she never cared for. None of it true. But once a rumor gains breath in a noble house, it becomes truth before sunrise." Elin lowered her gaze, tears forming. He squeezed her hand. "When she left, she was with child, not because of scandal," he added quickly, seeing fear flash across her face, "but because she had wed your father in secret before she departed. They married quietly, rightly, and joyfully." Elin's lips parted in relief. Rowena clasped her hands with sudden understanding. So the child was legitimate. The man nodded firmly. "Aye, entirely. But your mother knew the household would never believe it, not after how they forced her out. She feared they would take the child to protect themselves from gossip, or worse, hide the truth forever." Alistair closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the weight of it. The man continued, "Your father hid you because he loved you, because your mother begged him to keep you away from the reach of those who had wronged her. He believed he was keeping a promise." Elin covered her mouth, overwhelmed, but the man leaned closer, his voice gentle. "He was mistaken about one thing. Not all the McDougalls were against you. Some would have protected you. Some still will." He glanced at Alistair, who met his gaze with steady conviction. Elin looked between them, her heart tightening. She signed, "Why did my father warn me, even after so many years?" "Because he feared the return of those who had started the rumor," the man answered. "They returned recently to the region. Old fears rose again in him. He wrote the letter hoping to shield you from shadows that no longer hold power." Rowena's voice softened. "My uncle's wife passed years ago. The venom of her lies died with her," Alistair added with quiet strength, "and no one will ever use your mother's name to harm you again." Elin stared at him. Something in his gaze steadied her in a way nothing else had. She signed, "But I feared you. I feared what you might think." Alistair stepped closer. His hands moved slowly, clearly. "Elin, nothing in this story lessens you. Nothing." Her breath caught. He continued, "Your mother protected you with courage. Your father tried to keep you safe. Their love is not shame, it is honor." The man nodded in agreement. Rowena added, "And now that the truth is uncovered, the family can make amends. Properly." Elin shook her head, overwhelmed by generosity she had never expected. "I do not want anything from them," she signed. "Not land, not inheritance, not recognition." Rowena smiled softly. "That is why you deserve them more than anyone." Alistair took Elin's hand, lifting it gently. His touch was warm, cautious, respectful. "You deserve peace," he signed, "and I will make certain you have it." Her breath trembled. She did not pull her hand away. The older man cleared his throat softly, giving the two of them a small, knowing smile. Then he looked at Elin again. "I came to tell you, your mother never stopped loving you. She carried hope in her heart until her last day. Hope that one day you would be seen for who you truly are, not for the silence imposed on you, but for the strength you carry." Elin's tears fell freely now. The man gently wiped one away with the back of his hand, just as her mother once had. "You are not alone, Elin. Not anymore." She nodded, too moved to sign. Rowena stepped forward. "The men who came earlier will not trouble you again. I will speak with the estate myself. I will tell them the truth. I will tell them the past is done." Elin's breath eased. The tension in her shoulders relaxed for the first time in days. Alistair watched her, waiting for the moment she met his gaze again. When she finally did, his expression warmed into something soft and unwavering. He signed, "We begin anew now, if you wish it." Her heart answered before her hands did. She lifted her trembling fingers. "Yes." Rowena smiled. The older man sighed with relief. Alistair's shoulders loosened. A quiet weight lifted from him. In the soft stillness of the little shop, surrounded by threads and cloth and truths finally spoken aloud, Elin felt something she had long forgotten the shape of: safety, belonging, and a quiet, growing joy. There was no fear left to silence her, only the gentle certainty that everything painful had finally begun to settle, like ripples calming on a still river. Outside, the mist lightened. Inside, Elin raised her hands one last time, steady and sure. "Thank you." And for the first time in her life, she felt free to believe that the path ahead belonged to her. The mist of early spring lifted gently from the hills when Alistair asked Elin to walk with him. The older man who had known her mother had already departed at dawn, leaving behind a quiet blessing and the promise that truth could finally rest. Rowena had returned to the estate to settle the last of the inquiries, assuring them that nothing more would trouble Elin again. Now the town was calm. The stir of gossip had faded. The magistrate had withdrawn his questions. Even the seamstress seemed relieved, humming softly as she arranged ribbons in the shop window. But Alistair had not relaxed since morning. His jaw held a tension Elin couldn't read, and his hands, though gentle, kept fidgeting as if something weighed heavily on him. She watched him now as they crossed the quiet road toward the river path, where mist still clung to the edges of the water. He paused beneath a bare willow, turning to face her fully. His breath formed a faint cloud in the air. He lifted his hands. "Are you well?" Elin nodded. "You?" He hesitated, then gave a small shake of the head. "Not quite." Her brows drew together. "What troubles you?" He looked at her a long moment as though gathering courage. Then he signed, "There is something I must say, and I fear I may say it poorly." She offered a faint smile. "Then say it poorly. I will still understand." He laughed softly, lowering his gaze. When he looked back up, something unguarded shone in his eyes. "Elin, I do not want you to feel bound by anything, not by the past, not by fear, not by the name my family carries." She waited, her heart quickening. "You have endured years of silence," he signed. "You have been left to navigate the world alone. It is time someone stood beside you, if you want that." Her breath stopped. He stepped closer. His hands moved with a tenderness so careful she felt each gesture as if it touched her skin. "I want to be that person." Elin blinked, barely managing to steady her hands enough to sign, "Why me?" His answer was immediate. "Because you are brave, and kind, and clever, and because you look at the world not as something that owes you, but something you can still hold with hope." Her eyes warmed with tears. He reached toward her but paused, waiting for her permission. When she nodded, he took her hand gently in both of his thumb brushing her knuckles. "And because," he added, "every moment in silence with you feels full." Elin lowered her gaze, overwhelmed. She breathed out slowly, trying to steady the emotion rising in her chest. Her hands began to shape a reply, but her fingers trembled too badly. He squeezed her hand lightly. "Take your time." She did. She lifted her hands again, her signs small but steady. "Alistair, I am no one important." His expression shifted at once, softening into something like disbelief. "No one important," he repeated. "Elin, you changed the way I see silence, the way I see patience, the way I see myself. You gave me a reason to remember kindness after years of forgetting it." She shook her head, overwhelmed, but he caught her hands gently, stopping her denial before it formed. "No more hiding," he said softly. "Not from me." She closed her eyes briefly, then looked up at him again. Her hands lifted with new courage. "I feared what you would think of me." His reply came slowly, each gesture a vow. "I think you are extraordinary." Her breath broke. A tear slipped down her cheek. Alistair brushed it away carefully, as though afraid the gesture itself might startle her into distance. When she leaned slightly into his touch, his shoulders lowered with relief. They stood under the willow in quiet understanding, the river murmuring softly beside them. A few children ran across the bridge in the distance, their laughter visible only in the bright curve of their smiles. The world felt suddenly gentle. Alistair let her hand go only long enough to sign again. "There is more I wish to say, if you will hear it." She nodded. He reached into his coat, pulling out a small folded cloth. Inside it rested a ring, not extravagant, not ornate, but warm with meaning. A single polished stone, simple and clear. Something chosen with care instead of grandeur. Elin's breath caught. He held the ring in his palm, his other hand rising to speak. "I do not offer you a title," he signed, "or a grand life. Only a quiet future we can build together. One where your silence is not a burden. One where you are never misunderstood again." He looked at her, hope trembling behind his calm expression. "Will you marry me?" Eileen's hand flew to her mouth. She felt warmth surge through her chest, so sudden and so deep she needed a moment to breathe. Her vision blurred. She blinked quickly, brushing away a tear. Alistair waited with stillness he fought hard to maintain. Eileen stepped closer, her hands lifted. Yes. The relief on his face was so profound she felt it more than she saw it. His breath came out in a quiet tremor. He took her hands, pressing them gently to his heart before slipping the ring onto her finger with reverent care. She touched the stone as though afraid it would vanish. Her eyes shone with quiet disbelief. He smiled. "I will never stop thanking fate that I walked into that tavern." Eileen laughed, a soundless but radiant laugh, and shook her head. "And I will never stop wondering how someone like you knew my language." He answered without hesitation. "I learned it so my sister would never feel alone. And now I use it so you never will." Eileen took his hand again, intertwining their fingers, her breath steady at last. They walked farther along the riverbank, letting the paths curve beneath their feet. Alistair pointed out a cluster of early blossoms near the water's edge. Eileen admired them with quiet wonder, her hand still held in his. They spoke through gestures and glances, the world narrowing to the tender conversation between two hearts learning the same rhythm. When they reached the footbridge, Alistair stopped again. "There is something else," he signed. She turned to him, curious. He hesitated only a heartbeat. "I want the ceremony done in both languages." Eileen blinked. "Both?" He nodded. "Spoken and signed, before everyone. So there is no part of our vows you do not claim with your own hands." Her eyes filled again. She touched his cheek gently, lightly, as one touches something sacred. Then her hands formed the answer she could not keep inside. "I would like that more than anything." He leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. She felt his breath warm against her skin, steady and real and close. The world around them softened. The wind quieted. Even the river seemed to hush, as though granting them this small, precious stillness. They stayed like that for a long moment. Two people who had lived half their lives in separate silences, now sharing one that felt whole. When they finally walked back toward town, the sun broke through the last thin veil of mist, casting pale gold along the rooftops. Vendors opened their stalls. Children chased each other across the square. A few townsfolk noticed the ring on Eileen's finger and whispered among themselves, not with malice, but with curiosity and shy smiles. Eileen felt no fear in their eyes now. Alistair held her hand openly, proudly. He introduced her to anyone who greeted him, speaking her name with warmth, ensuring she could read his lips clearly. And each time he spoke it, she felt something inside her unfold. At the seamstress's shop, Rowena waited by the door, her expression softened by something close to joy. When she saw Alistair's hand around Eileen's, and the ring on Eileen's finger, her eyes warmed. "Well," she said with a knowing lift of her brow, "I see the day has brought good news." Eileen blushed. Alistair simply nodded with quiet pride. Rowena stepped forward, taking Eileen's hands gently. "I am honored," she said slowly, clearly, forming each word so Eileen could follow. "Truly. I wish you every happiness." Eileen nodded in gratitude. Rowena continued, "And know this, whatever shadows once followed your mother, they end here, with you and with this union." Eileen held her gaze, finding sincerity free of judgment, something her younger self had never expected from nobility. When Rowena left them, Alistair turned to Eileen again. "Are you ready?" he signed. "For what?" she asked. "For the rest of our lives." She smiled, a soft, radiant smile that reached her eyes. Her hands answered without hesitation. "With you?" "Yes." He drew her into an embrace, gentle but steady, as though he had waited years for this moment. She rested her cheek against his chest. She felt the slow, even rhythm of his heartbeat. She closed her eyes. The shop faded. The town faded. The world faded. There was only the warmth of his arms, the strength of his promise, and the quiet certainty that she had not simply been found, she had been chosen. chosen in silence, chosen in truth, chosen in love. When she finally looked up, he brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch soft as dusk. He signed the last words of their day with reverence. "My heart is yours." Elin took his hands gently, bringing them to her lips. "And you are mine." Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.